Thank you for waiting. So right now we are pleased to welcome Julien Malara, who is a journalist, director and self-builder. He writes and presents videos broadcast on various social networks to share knowledge about ecological construction. And right now he is going to talk to us about the topic of his conference. Here it's going to be about building an ecological house and telling us how to learn from his mistakes in ecological construction. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. A quick introduction of who I am. I'm a little jerk, 27 years old, who's been making videos on YouTube for about 10 years. And for the past 7 years, we've been making documentaries about ecology. At first, we started with politics, with anarchism. Then we moved towards ecology, radical ecology. And more concretely, I started building my house out of a shipping container to really experience what ecology was all about. Not just in books, though I love them. I needed real hands-on experience. So I told myself, I'll start a project and learn by doing. I'll make mistakes, but that helps me learn from them. If you don't act, you don't make mistakes or learn. That's my philosophy. Some people wait 2 or 3 years to fully build their project first. I preferred to start quickly and learn as I went. We document everything on our YouTube channel, Julien Malara, which was previously called Demos Kratos. We previously changed the name from Demos Kratos, which stood for democracy and power to the people. And then, actually, in the end, we talked about so many topics beyond democracy that we thought it made more sense to call it Julien Malara. Because in the end, it's all the questions I ask myself and all the topics where I try to find answers. So I suggest that I give you a detailed presentation of how I built my house out of a shipping container, how I tried to make an eco-friendly house, and how I succeeded or failed. That we'll see. And then we can start a discussion. Can you explain this project more and what an ecological house truly means? First of all, why did I choose to build a house out of a shipping container? It's because, as I told you, I had kind of a triple goal. The first was that I wanted to self-build my house. So I needed a simple system that I could understand. Since I had no knowledge of do-it-yourself, you have to start from the idea that I'm basically an intellectual, not a handyman, even if those two categories don't really mean anything in the end. But all my life, people have always told me that I'm not a handyman. So I was really starting from scratch. So I needed something easy to build myself. Also, I had a limited budget, and I'm generally someone who's in a hurry in life. So I needed something cheap and pretty quick to make. And the third thing, which was really the core of the project, was to do it in the most eco-friendly way possible. That's what motivates me and our YouTube channel. So I'm not claiming that the container house is the best form of eco-friendly housing. We'll even ask ourselves if it's truly an eco-friendly house. For me, though, the form stood out most. We did a report at someone's place who built a container house, who apparently had no knowledge, very little budget, and managed to self-build this house. So that spoke to me. I told myself, well, I'm going to start this kind of project. Even though there were certainly other ways to do it, probably more ecological, but we'll see about that later. Before addressing whether this container house is ecological, the question is, what is an ecological house? What do I mean by an ecological house? I would say, first of all, it's a house where the construction techniques and materials used are ecological. That means they have a low impact on the local environment, but also on the global environment. Embodied energy is the energy and resources used during construction. Next, the second criterion of an ecological house would be a house that, in the long term, consumes very little. Residents use minimal energy to live comfortably. And the third criterion, which is certainly the most important, is that this house does not harm its environment. But above all, I would even say that's the most important thing, that it does everything to improve it. It's a word we hear quite a lot. Now, especially since désobéissance fertile has popularized this word a bit, improving one's land. If you enter it in Google or Word, it'll be underlined in red. It's not a French word, but it's really the opposite of degrade. It's saying it's not just about stopping the degradation. It's about being involved in your environment and its life. I suggest we get started a little bit. by watching different videos. I'm going to present all of this to you, show you the different stages of the construction and the choices I made. To begin, I chose helical piles for the foundations. As you can see in the picture, these are steel piles that are driven into the ground, about 2 meters underground, and they provide support. The house is on stilts. Why did I pick helical piles? We use a giant screwdriver to screw this in, and it needs very little energy to set up. We have someone who comes for half a day to screw in the piles so we can place our containers on top. That's it. I absolutely didn't want to use concrete foundations. For me, an eco-friendly house doesn't start with concrete foundations because cement uses a huge amount of energy and sand destroys the seabed and sand extraction destroys the planet. Concrete was a no for me, so I chose screw piles instead. You might ask me, is steel really more eco-friendly than concrete? We can ask ourselves that, but screw piles still had the advantage. I wasn't destroying my land. I wasn't coming in to terraform or destroy the life that was on my land. I just put in a few pilings and it even leaves space for wildlife to come and live under my house. So that's the choice I made, also because it was 2 to 3 times cheaper than concrete foundations. In just 2 days I had my foundations, but with concrete, with the drying time and all that, it took several weeks, even more than a month. Then the second step was to use shipping containers to the structure of my house. So I bought last trip shipping containers. Basically, these are shipping containers that have traveled for 15 years across the oceans and are going to be recycled, but they are still structurally intact and they are still watertight. So they can't travel by sea anymore because they might break. But if you use them for the structure of a house that you insulate and you don't expose them to the elements, there's no reason it shouldn't work. Why did I choose to recycle shipping containers? I realized they've already been made. If they go to recycling, energy will be consumed during the recycling process. And if I have to build a new structure, I will use energy for that new structure. If I reuse second-hand containers, I ultimately save the cost of recycling and the cost of a new structure. I'm not really saving materials since the steel from the containers could be reused, but I am saving processing energy. In hindsight, we'll see it later. A wooden structure might have been even more eco-friendly because the wood would have stored more carbon than it would have consumed for its construction. So there you have it. We can say that using containers is ecologically neutral, whereas wood could have been positive. I bought 4 shipping containers totaling 116 square meters. That too, we could ask ourselves, isn't that a bit too big for an ecological house? Why did I make it so big? One day, I planned to sell this house and build a more ecological one. And so I had to think of a house big enough for the real estate market. Otherwise, clearly an ecological house should be smaller than this. It depends on how many people you have living in it, but here there aren't 8 of us. That's it. So you can see the shipping containers a bit. These shipping containers, you have to see that I came to cut them. We have 16 tons of steel and I removed some. 2 tons of steel were removed by cutting the walls with a circular saw and sent for recycling. The advantage of the containers was that in half a day, my 4 containers were delivered and set up, and I had the main structure of my house. Then I spent several weeks cutting and organizing the interior, but that's the advantage of the container. It was a quick structure that didn't require any effort from me because they came with the crane and set down the 4 containers. The effort came afterwards, cutting everything and jumping onto the scaffolding. As you can see very well, once my structure was ready, I came to install my windows. That's when I realized the container might not be that good. Because I had to rebuild wooden frames, I installed my windows in a tunnel style, similar to a timber frame house. I have my oriented strand board frame that allows me to install my windows and all that. With welding everywhere, because you're working with metal, so you have to weld. You rarely screw things in. That's another complication of the house. Container. Cutting, screwing into, and welding steel are all a pain. So I learned the hard way that working with wood would have been more fun. Once we had that structure, we started working on the framework. A big advantage is that since I have a flat roof and containers that can support several tons, I was able to ask the delivery guy to deliver all the beams directly onto the roof. And then it took us half an hour to install with Baptiste, who's filming here, and Theo, the editor of these videos. Thanks to them for helping me. I couldn't have done it alone. But there you go. You see, we launched the drone in time-lapse, and in half an hour, we assembled the whole flat roof. I chose to build a flat roof and single-story house for easier, less expensive construction. That's it. And so here you see in the end, the container house still uses a lot of wood. We'll keep seeing that in the different stages. Then I came to fill this roof with 50 centimeters of cellulose wadding. That's it. I filled it with cellulose wadding. It's an insulator made from recycled newspaper, so kind of like the containers. In the end, it's a resource that has a roughly neutral ecological impact because there's the energy used for transportation in the future to bring it to my place. But that's pretty negligible. So it's a tool, a recyclable insulator. The advantage was that it's an insulator, as we said, more or less eco-friendly, very light. The structure of my container still needed a lightweight insulator. Efficient for both summer and winter comfort. And above all, very easy to install. We used a machine downstairs to blow cellulose insulation onto the roof, insulating it in one day. I could have used more eco-friendly insulation like wood, wool, or straw, which are more ecological. Why? Because wood and straw store carbon. So they wouldn't have been environmentally neutral, but they would have been positive in a good way, in the sense that they capture carbon monoxide too, so they have a better impact on our environment. The issue was that straw is cheap, which is good, but it's heavy. And as I mentioned, my container, I hadn't thought about this structural issue due to a lack of knowledge. Wood wool, on the other hand, was light. However, it's 5 to 10 times the price of cellulose wadding for equivalent performance. So that's the budget. The house's constraints mean we can't always pick the most eco-friendly solutions, but we do our best. Then we close this roof with oriented strand board panels and an ethylene propylene DNA monomer top. It's plastic, so it's made from petroleum. Here we're asking, where is the ecology in this? Why did I make this choice? Because I'm going to plant vegetation on my roof afterwards. I needed a top to hold soil, retain water, and plant vegetation on my roof. Create a living space for animals and plants around me. We saw with the helical piles that they don't take up space on the ground. Animals can pass underneath. And on my roof, they can also do things. It will be planted with vegetation. If you want to watch my videos, I explain why there. Sticking the ethylene propylene DNA monomer tarp was a nightmare. It wasn't simple. Because in YouTube tutorials, be careful with YouTube tutorials. The green roof will also help to strengthen the insulation a little bit. Actually, not so much in winter, more in summer. Rather than hitting tiles or hitting a tarp that would be black. Here we have greenery. It allows for better comfort in the summer and also makes the sound of rain less noticeable. It's also about comfort and cutting energy use. Then we get to the wall insulation. The main criticism I get when I say I built a container house is, okay, LOL. People thought my container house would be too hot in summer, not realizing I insulated it. I'm telling you, these YouTube comments mostly say I'll be hot or die from the heat. Okay, you're building a container house, but expect to be cold and hot, right? As you saw, there's 50 centimeters of cellulose insulation on the roof and 24 centimeters of wood wool on the walls. Well, an eco-friendly insulation, that's it. And so technically it was pretty simple to set up. I built a structure. You see the rafters that I installed? I welded brackets onto my container and placed wood fiber insulation between the rafters. A rain barrier, wooden cladding, and then a magnificent rain barrier, Le Roi Merlin, and wooden cladding. And we had a house that was very well insulated. We made a little video about which insulation materials to choose. We compare a bit all the insulation materials that exist, and especially which ones are the most efficient, the most eco-friendly, and the easiest to install. All that, and we see that straw, for example, has less of an ecological impact 26 means you can store 26 kilograms of carbon monoxide, 2 per cubic meter of insulation. Wood wool lets you store 16 kilograms of carbon monoxide, 2 per cubic meter of insulation. The hemp cotton is between -20 and -5. Cellulose wadding is at +4, meaning that cellulose wadding is the limit between being ecological and starting to pollute. You can see the insulation below: glass wool, rock wool, and polyurethane. There it releases more carbon monoxide, 2 than it stores because it stores none. So, overall, do you have a general idea of the wall insulation in this house? And then let's get to the shameful part, the floor insulation. Actually, building a container house means making a lot of compromises. It's cool because there are containers, they're there, the structure is already ready, we just have to insulate all around. However, when you have to insulate the floor, you face 2 constraints. The first is that your container has a fixed height. You can't just put 30 centimeters of insulation because you'll lose height under the ceiling. I needed an insulation that was thin. Also, I wanted insulation that I could walk on directly, insulation that was load-bearing. Despite the research I did, I couldn't find any bio-based load-bearing insulation. So I went with polyurethane, which is probably the most environmentally harmful insulation possible. Looking at the previous chart, polyurethane is at the bottom and emits 156 kilos of carbon monoxide, 2 per cubic meter of insulation produced. The eco-friendly house clearly suffers in terms of insulation. But here it was an impossible choice. I could have easily rebuilt a wooden structure, insulated it with cellulose or wood wool, put oriented strand board back, and installed a wooden floor. But actually, that would have been a solution that would have made me lose ceiling height. That would have cost me 3 or 4 times more than polyurethane, which would have taken me much more time and used a lot more resources. So it's a very imperfect solution, but it's due to the shape of the shipping container and maybe the initial design of my house. Can you boo me? In the end, let's do a bit of a summary of this eco-friendly house. Here's the My Container House playlist with 20 videos covering every step, including electricity and plumbing. Each time I ask myself if I made the best choices. If we revisit whether my house is eco-friendly, we could say that the sum of the impact of all, the ecological sum, well, the sum of the ecological impact of all the materials I've used, we would be at 0 for the containers, the cellulose watt, because these are recycled products. We could say that we have a positive impact on all the wood I've used, the framework, the rafters, the wood wool, the oriented strand board and more oriented strand board. Not great, but I used a lot of wood and wood wool insulation which stores carbon. That's interesting. We use screw piles to avoid concrete, protect the soil and preserve natural life. We have the green roof. But on the other hand, we have the plastic tarp, we have the plastic joinery, we have the metal brackets, we have the polyurethane for the floor. We have a lot of little things that unfortunately make up for it. All my work with eco-friendly insulation, wood and recycling containers. I would need to do some proportion calculations, but in any case, just philosophically, psychologically, that makes up for it a bit. In the end, I think my house isn't eco-friendly. In the sense that we could have done better, actually. We could have done a lot better. But with all the constraints I had, not knowing how to build a house, having very little support and help with that, and the fact I chose containers, which created many constraints for me to make these choices very clearly. If I had wanted to build an ecological house, a much more ecological one, or rather, let me put it this way. Otherwise, I plan to keep this house for 5 years and then it will be sold on the market. So, give me your prices. This house was a trial. It's very good. It will turn out very well. We'll look at it again later. But I'm still striving to improve. So, what house will I build in 5 years? A house made of wood, earth and straw. We're not going to reinvent the wheel every time. At the Low Tech Festival, we've seen it everywhere. Earth, wood, straw and hemp are materials that are very, very interesting because they're bio-based and they store carbon. They're not that complicated to implement. In the end, and they would give the house much greater ecological coherence. But my house, I think, still follows an ecological approach because we've tried to minimize our impact on the environment as much as possible. That is compared to a traditional concrete or brick house with polyurethane. You see, I used a little bit of it for my floor. Most new houses today use fiberglass, polyurethane, and polystyrene. Very clearly, I have nothing to be ashamed of compared to the traditional houses that have been built. So let's say that this first goal is to build something that minimizes its impact on the environment as much as possible. I reduced as much as I could, much more than the vast majority of houses. My second criterion for an eco-friendly house was minimizing its inhabitants' consumption as much as possible. In other words, is my house well insulated? Am I not going to overconsume? Well, I can find that out thanks to the thermal engineering office, which helped me design the insulation of my house. Who did studies? Who looked at how much I would theoretically consume based on everything I did? Normally, my energy consumption diagnostic, the performance energetic rating should be A. Have you seen those charts? A plus A, B, C, D, E, F. A plus equals a passive house using no energy for heating or cooling. I'm right between an A plus and an A. With a bit more effort, I could have made it passive, but it's complicated since passive is still self-built. I wouldn't have felt able to do it 2 years ago. Today, I would get help from professionals to reach that A plus. But what it means is that, in any case, my house is practically meets real estate standards. 2020, which is the new thermal regulation, so all houses built from 2020 onwards should be at least up to that standard. In B, or even A actually, I'm not even sure if B is included. Are there any thermal engineers in the room watching me? So we now have a house that largely meets the goal of reducing its residents' long-term consumption. And to finish the third one, the third criterion is, does the house enhance its environment? Well, we can say that the stilts, the helical piles and green roof, minimize my impact and let wildlife and plants thrive despite my house. Most importantly, building my forest garden will truly improve my environment. Create a peaceful refuge for local animals and plants. To put up several birdhouses to provide water for all the wild animals that flee from hunters and come by, that pass through. On my land, it's about trying to fit into my environment and help the other animal species around me to thrive. In conclusion, is my house eco-friendly? I still have a bitter taste in my mouth because I tell myself that I could have done better. And if there was a way to do better, doesn't that mean I wasted resources unnecessarily? If I'd spent more time learning or gotten more help, couldn't I have done much better? Been much more environmentally friendly? So, didn't my stubbornness to do everything quickly by myself end up wasting resources unnecessarily? The real question is, why didn't I do better? This is my self-criticism before the party. Sorry, ladies and gentlemen, I didn't do better. I wasn't able to do better. Why? Mainly because I lacked knowledge. Very clearly, I did a lot of research before starting. We had already done a lot of reports on the subject. I knew about the existence of the Herpaille box, but the budgets for Herpaille box houses seemed out of reach, unattainable to me. Why? Because it's true that I haven't talked about it much, but my container house cost me about 90,000 euros for 116 square meters. That means we're at 775 euros per square meter. That's almost half the price of a Herpaille box house built by professionals. You're going to answer me. You can self-build the Herpaille box house to save money. Yeah, but you have to take into account that I started from a point where I had zero knowledge. And for me, with the container house, I already had a structure built. It seems simpler to me in hindsight. It was tough. I struggled, but yeah, I didn't choose the Airstro box house because it seemed more out of reach. Today, it seems to me pretty attainable. I have enough knowledge now to be able to start this project, which brings me to my second point. I probably lacked competent professionals to make up for my lack of knowledge. Before starting my project, I did a lot of research In the end, I didn't know about the Tweezer networks, Casters, Oasis, and others focused on bio-based houses and participatory construction projects. I started by looking around my land, checking out all the professionals who were there. So I asked some earth movers, I asked some builders around my place, help me, give me advice. I didn't begin thinking I'd do everything alone or was smarter than others. I began wanting advice, but quickly realized something. That actually most building professionals today don't know what an eco-friendly house is. Actually, when I asked, I had 10 quotes from 10 excavators. I asked them if there was an alternative to concrete. Can we use recycled concrete? You looked at me like, what do you want? I'll put in cinder blocks, I'll pour concrete, just leave me alone. And it's the same for everything. Actually, many companies are now eco-friendly. I know them from 2 years on the job, making reports, meeting them and seeing them at festivals. But the fact is that we still have too few professionals who are trained on these topics and who can help. That's why it's important to support this field, to help it grow and to learn more so we don't make the mistakes I made. Maybe wait longer before starting your project, but it's tricky since everyone has different priorities. I know friends who, just like me, wanted to build eco-friendly houses, but they had 3 kids. They needed a house that could be built very quickly, or that didn't require much self-building, something that would just happen on its own, so they turned to houses that are ecological disasters. Because they didn't have the time and because they have a family. And because it's understandable that not everyone can build their own house and spend days putting earth on straw, there are people who need professionals. That's it. That kind of sums it up. My experience, which, as I said, is absolutely not that of a professional, is absolutely not meant to say follow my example, but rather to share feedback, really. I like to say this phrase every time. A little punk, 27 years old, who thinks he can do something eco-friendly on his own, and who tries, and who films a bit, whether he succeeds or not. And that results in about 20 videos on the Plus channel. There are also about 20 reports on houses that are more eco-friendly than mine to help balance things out a bit. So there you go. I invite you to check out this channel if you don't know it, and I'll answer all your questions if you have any. And don't hesitate to put me on the spot and ask me, why didn't you do it like that? That would have been much better, and I'll tell you yes, but I didn't know. I was ignorant.
Hi, Julien. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you very much for your presentation. So for me then, indeed, just to challenge you a little bit, I wanted to go back over everything that was... the rain barrier, for example, the plastic top on top. Do you know how many years, for example, it will take? How many years we'll have to wait before we need to work on it again? To redo the waterproofing? Well, there you go. Knowing that these are materials that are supposed to last a little longer over time, unlike other things. And if you know any alternatives to these materials that, after all, are still derived from petroleum, if you know of anything else. Thank you.
To talk about the PDM tarp already on the roof, normally it has a lifespan of 50 years if you leave it exposed to the open air, well, in the sun. Especially when you green your roof, you prevent ultraviolet rays from damaging your tarp, you prevent hail from breaking it, you really protect your tarp quite a bit. So theoretically, its lifespan might even be doubled. I can't give an exact number, but it definitely lasts 50 years in the sun and elements. Once you cover it with soil and it's protected, you at least double that, I think. On the waterproofing part, we've seen in our reports, waterproofings, for example, it's made of wood. I don't know much more, but some bio-based waterproofing is used. I don't like to say things like that when I see there are professionals around me who themselves are like, those are shear walls in B12. There are definitely better options than the Leroy Merlin rain barrier, though they're likely pricier and serve other purposes. But yes, we can do better than the Leroy Merlin rain barrier, that's for sure. But after all, the Leroy Merlin rain barrier will be behind my siding. In theory, it shouldn't need work for the house's entire lifespan.
It's okay if you can't see me, it's not a big deal.
I'm here, I see you, it's all good.
Hi, and thank you so much for your talk. I have a question. You talked a lot. It was great. Regarding construction, an eco-friendly house also includes energy consumption, water and electricity. That also needs to be taken into account. I'd like to know how you set that up. How does it work? Thank you.
That was the second criterion for the eco-friendly house, very low consumption. And here, well, already at the level of the water system. I planned it very tightly, meaning my bathroom and my kitchen are very close together. The pipes are very short, so there's very little loss. For example, with hot water, there's very little. That's already something, right? We'll have rainwater coming in later in the project. I've already planned to have rainwater collection, especially for the garden. The toilets are still under consideration, dry toilets. You have to get over the psychological barrier of not peeing in water anymore, but from the water's point of view, it's pretty basic. At least what I did is, I already chose a thermodynamic water heater. I could have chosen a solar water heater. The fact is, I knew less about that technology at the time. The thermodynamic water heater uses 4 times less energy than a standard electric one. Also, mine connects to my ventilation system, so it pulls air from inside. It uses the heat from that air to heat the water in my hot water tank, and then it expels the cold air outside my house. That way, I won't have a ventilation system that just takes my warm air and sends it outside. I'm going to recycle the heat from inside my house to heat my hot water, so I really have a water heater that greatly reduces its energy consumption. And when it comes to heating and cooling the house, I have a heat pump that likewise uses energy 4 to 6 times less than electric heaters or traditional air conditioners. Since my house is well insulated and oriented, we put a lot of thought into its orientation. We thought I'd need sunshades above the bay windows to block summer sun. There is a whole concept around the bioclimatic house, which will allow us to reduce consumption as much as possible. And the remaining consumption is produced by a heat pump, which is very, very, very energy efficient. So it's not for nothing that my house will have an A rating. It's because actually when you add up the insulation and everything I've considered in terms of energy consumption, it's going to be very low. I think I had estimated that, well, it's very difficult. The estimates we'll have to see after a year, once I've lived in it. I had estimated about 250 euros per year for electricity. All the water heating, house heating, the induction, cooktops, basically, the whole life of the house, everything is electric for me. 250 euros per year, knowing that there will obviously be a solar installation that will be coupled with that. So actually, I will very quickly be able to produce my own energy. My shop Solaire estimated I would need 1,500 to 2,000 watts of solar panels to fully cover my needs. You have to consider the battery and related issues, but let's set that aside. I need only 1,500 to 2,000 watts of solar panels, which isn't much. There you go.
Thank you for your presentation. First of all, have you thought about renovation instead of new construction? And why did you choose new construction instead of renovation?
That the idea of renovation didn't stay in my mind for very long, because I like to start projects from scratch. I like to think about everything from the very beginning and finish. I want to finish quickly. That's my impatience. Still, I like completing something I started from A to Z. Renovation takes time to understand the building and previous work. It adds a lot of constraints because you either have to tear things down to redo them, or you can't tear things down to redo them, so you try to add on top. For me, renovation brought way too many constraints. Sure, it could be an idea for an eco-friendly house, but in my mind, I thought taking a house that's very poorly insulated or in ruins and trying to make something eco-friendly out of it, that seemed more complicated to me than starting from scratch. I'll add good insulation, orient the house well, and consider airflow. It was actually a matter of convenience. Now, instead of a container house, imagine one built from wood, earth, and straw. Ecologically speaking, I think more detailed calculations would be needed, but I think it's more environmentally friendly to demolish a house that's really poorly insulated, made with crappy materials and all that, and to build a new house on that land, because a house made of wood, earth, and straw. Adding up the ecological impact of all materials and actions is positive overall because carbon is stored in straw and wood. So, to build a house can be more eco-friendly than renovating an old one, but all of that really depends on each individual case. Anyway, for me, renovation didn't really appeal to me that much.
Hello, thank you for sharing your experience. I had two questions. The first one is, why do you want to get into real estate when you say, in 5 years, I'm going to sell this house? While we're currently facing a land crisis, and I think a lot of us are struggling to find housing. So I imagine it's also so you can build another house later that would suit you better. But are there other reasons then that make you want to do this? That was my first question. And the second one, are you considering sharing the plans and information on how to repair the inside of your house? In a simple way, like, I built this, but something might not work. How would you fix it? For those who come after me?
Nothing can go wrong. It's all well designed. Right? Indeed. When I chose this house project, actually, I started with two constraints. The first was that I had very little money, so I had to look for land in a place where I didn't necessarily want to spend my days, but I chose a plot in the countryside, somewhere near Lyon. I took the train, and then I didn't have a stable private life, meaning I didn't have a wife, a partner, or children, or maybe just something stable, a place to continue my life. Actually, my life can still evolve, change completely. I have no idea what the future holds. So settling somewhere and deciding to live there for the next 20 years, knowing I had, with no budget and unsure about the future, things were complicated. I say I'll sell my house in 5 years, but life might have me stay there for 20. I don't know, but in any case, the idea is, it was a house for me to practice in. That's really something only a rich person would say. It's true, I was just practicing and had 150,000 euros to spend. I'll start that, then do something else. I went into debt for 25 years, but no, really. I wanted a place to experiment with ecological ideas. I live in the city, I work in the city, and whenever I need to make videos to test solar panels or rainwater harvesting, all that stuff, I don't have a playground. So I wanted to have this place to learn to do things and to keep it if life allows, or sell it if life changes, and do something else. Somewhere else, even more eco-friendly, better. You know, it was just a step in a long life, I hope.
And about making it accessible?
My house has a big advantage. Searching container house on YouTube brings up all the tutorials. Everything I've done from A to Z, so you really understand the house you're going to live in. And then, indeed, my goal is to give the person, when I sell it, as much information as possible, knowing that the YouTube channel already has quite a lot. It's about giving as much as possible so he can better manage the house, renovate, or handle other needs.
Did you go for a paper format? Because it's great to have YouTube videos, but imagine there's a blackout or something happens and you can't give access to that. Have you considered writing it down somewhere? Or writing a book?
Each video is already about 10 script pages, and you're talking about writing a book. I'm in talks with several publishers about writing a book on building the container house. So there will definitely be written records to pass on. There are plans everywhere. There are photos. Not great, but lots of documents exist.
I had a question about the helical piles. I wanted to know if they were only usable for containers or maybe also for wooden houses.
As a foundation, I learned about helical piles from Sylvie Pereira's channel, where she built her tiny house using them. You put in your pilings, you make a wooden grid, an insulated wooden slab on these piles, and then you build your structure on top of that. So indeed for me it was practical for the containers because I just set them on top and that was it. You build your slab on a wooden house pile, so it's definitely possible. And the techno piles, I didn't mention their lifespan. Estimated by the manufacturer at 100 years after that, corrosion slowly affects the piles. So you might think it's less durable than concrete. If my house is still around and in good condition in 100 years, that's already a good thing. And then concrete, it cracks, it breaks. There are also problems with concrete. Whereas my technopiles, in principle, unless there's some kind of natural disaster, they last longer than concrete but have a slightly shorter lifespan. So those are questions to think about.
Hi, Julien. Thank you very much. So for this conference, I wanted to know, you mentioned the Castor or ACES collectives and all that. Then I'm not very familiar with it. I wanted to know if you could tell us a bit more.
Well, I have to admit that I'm not very familiar with it either. I've done many reports on people who built their own houses. These networks. So it's mainly networks that allow you to have professionals who help you, who support you, and who let you organize participatory construction projects. For example, near Lyon, we considered reporting on a house he's building. Grieber method uses wood, straw bales, and plaster. He alternates every 2 weeks between doing his own work and participatory construction, possibly through Twiza or something similar. He brings trainers to organize everything on site. So these are really interesting networks. I don't remember all the names because I haven't used them. I just know them by name. In some reports we've done. I was aware that these networks existed before I started, but I kind of decided not to get into that. Because organizing a participatory work site sounds great on paper, 10 people coming to help you do something. In reality, it means you have to cook for 10 people and your work site has to be well organized enough. So that if they stay for 2 weeks, they have things to do. Already use that when I go to my work site. Sometimes I spend an hour just thinking about how I'm going to do things. I think it over. Organizing a participatory work site, directing 10 people, preparing food in the evening, checking on guests, and handling project needs once seemed out of reach to me, but these are things that can be done too. And maybe in my next house, I'll go for a project like that, at least to get support from professionals, that's for sure.
Hello, I have a question in the back over there. In terms of planning, I wanted to know how long it took you between the design and the major stages of construction. Do you live in it? I didn't understand that.
I don't live in it yet.
And also, in terms of August, do you spend your weekends there and work at the same time, or is this really what you do?
I started the project a little over 2 years ago, and there was 6 months, a bit more, of reflection. Is building a container house the right solution? I often wondered that, especially after borrowing a book from a lady in the room. I never returned it, and she noticed. All kinds of eco-friendly houses, and yet I still chose the container house. It was in the book after all, so there you go, that's what happened. 6 months of thinking about what I wanted to do, planning with my buddy who was an architect. From submitting the building permit application to getting it approved or not, there was more than 6 months of paperwork. It could even be 8 if we include the start of planning. I started the work in March 2022. At first, the containers were delivered. So in September, it will be about a year and a half. I should move into the house in September or October, so it will have taken a year and a half to build. 90%, 95%. I like statistics. All alone, I say, all alone, it's really me, all alone in the house. About 10% of the time there was still help, but where? My brother Baptiste and Theo helped me set things up. I did get some help from time to time. Regarding my time on the construction site, I spent about 2.5 days each week. Like it was Monday, Tuesday, on the construction site, and on Wednesday I watched tutorials for the next week, prepared, shopped at Leroy Merlin, and got ready for what's next. And then, during the remaining 2.5 days of the week, working on YouTube videos, reports, and projects. Because we have a production company, we make videos for associations and businesses. So yeah, the week was split between the house and all the professional audiovisual projects. On weekends, I cried in the shower to rest because sandblasting the containers was horrible because it was 40 degrees. And before the containers were insulated, inside the container, it was 50. Actually, it wasn't 40. So yeah, the weekend was for rest so that on Monday and Tuesday, I could cope. It's been 18 months of self-building. But you have to take into account that there were many, many, many of those 1.5 years when I was alone. And that I spent 2 or 3 days a week there, and I really had zero knowledge. So just screwing in screws made me think about what the different screws are, which screw I should use. I like to dig deep, so before buying a camera, I might watch hours of tutorials to find the best one. I'll show you. I spent 10 hours watching tutorials just to choose screws. On Comme un pingouin dans le désert, there's a 30-minute video comparing screws. I'm one of the few idiots who watched 30 minutes on screws and thought, wow, Torx screws are awesome. There's a learning curve. If I did it again, I might take a year instead of a year and a half, and with more help, maybe even less time.
Hello, thank you for your presentation. So you don't live there yet? We're at the Low Tech Festival. You were talking about experimenting with this house. Are there any systems being developed as part of Low Tech? I'm thinking maybe about the shower that reuses water, or even the pantry. To install a digester to create your biogas for your cooking and all that. Are these systems you plan to set up in your house?
Clearly, the main goal of this house was to be my playground for experimentation. As soon as there's something to experiment with, to have a place to try it out. So indeed, the methanizer that creates biogas from your waste, I've known about these things for 2 years and I've absolutely wanted to try it. Solar heating, I've also wanted to try that for a very long time. Everything like photovoltaic panels is planned, but that's a bit less low-tech. And then there's everything related to rainwater harvesting. Indeed, everything at this festival makes me want to try it out. Starting in September, I'll have a playground. And expect to see a lot of Julien Discovers Life tests on the channel. And wow, actually, we can collect rainwater to use in our garden. It's crazy. So yes, there will be experiments.
Hi, thanks for the introduction. I had a question. Did you face any obstacles from local authorities or even when it came to financing your house? Because it's a self-built project, but now everything is so regulated and standardized. I know lenders are often reluctant to finance young self-builders, so I wanted to see if you had any feedback on that.
I was extremely lucky because I applied for my loan just before the crisis. I applied for my loan 2 years ago. After COVID ended, people began returning to the countryside and there was some pressure to join them. When I went to the bank, I told them I had a self-build project, container house, all that. They didn't care. They didn't care. They didn't care if it was a container house, earth, straw, or wood. But when I said I was a freelance performer, they were really interested. Suspicious. They thought, a shady Timban who wants money, but does he actually make money or not? So then my big job was to convince the bank that I actually made money. Actually, I do have a salary every month, so I can pay it back. And fortunately, I had a real estate broker who supported my application and pushed to make it go through. But the fact is, really, at the bank level, they didn't care at all that it was a shipping container. At no point did she even ask me any questions about it. She was just in standby mode. What do you do with the videos and how much do you make? So there you go. The money was transferred. Today, the situation is different. I think, by the way, even the fact that it was self-built, she didn't care at all. I don't know anything about it. I'm just going to dive in. The fool arrives. I built a house, but like do-it-yourself skills. You're a freelancer, so not the right priorities in my opinion, but there you go. With the bank, it went through partly thanks to my broker, then at City Hall. I quickly realized that with a City Hall permit, they don't care about your house's structure. What they want to know is what it will look like in the end. So I looked at the PLUs, the local urban planning regulations from the city halls, and I checked if they prohibited wooden cladding, because I wanted wooden cladding. Where I am, there was no PLU. That means there are no rules, which is more annoying because actually they make up the rules as they go. It depends on whether they like you or not. So I was like, I don't know if I'm allowed to use wood cladding or not, but that was fine. They said no, we don't like flat roofs. We want a sloped roof. Except for me, a sloped roof, that scared me. I was thinking it would need more wood, it would need tiles, so it might be more expensive, maybe more complicated to build. So I looked for laws. And I found one that said if a roof is green, the city hall is required to accept your flat roof. I returned to City Hall and said I was making a green roof, so they had to accept it. They refused. We know better than you, hush. I submitted the permit for the third time. I cited the law, said it prohibits it if written, and he agreed. That's the issue. No PLU or clear rules. It's like the Wild West. Also, it's a town of just 300, and the mayor doesn't know everything. So you realize, yeah, well, not really. You just negotiate. It's a power struggle. Looking back, it was a bad idea. The green flat roof cost much more than a sloped one. Well, it was simple to do, I admit, but in terms of cost, a green flat roof was much more expensive than if I had done a sloped one. So build sloped roofs, it's still simpler, well, cheaper in terms of simplicity. You saw it in the flat roof video of the containers. They put in the beams, and that was it. It was done. We struggled with Baptiste for days, so I'm not minimizing our pain. But anyway, all that to say that administratively, there are always little problems to deal with. But that part is well done.
It's me again, me. I wanted to ask you, actually, to be able to come back to the question that was asked earlier about the previous aspect, just before the administrative aspect, financial. All that. So, well, I put it in there. From what I understood, you went through a loan, and so I've been following you for a little while now, even from the time of the Democratize channel, so the videos were more focused, political, and all that. And I also kind of guessed, well, how should I say, the ideology that drives you? I'm asking myself this question. Did you think about taking out a loan? Was it kind of obvious for you? Did you think, this sucks, I don't want to give money to banks and go into debt even for that? So during that time, having to spend 20 years telling myself, well, now I have to pay back my loan, that's going to hold me back professionally, I have to be accountable. Is that true, and does it bother you to share that with us? More or less an estimate of all the expenses you've spent or will still have to spend, potentially, until the house is livable. For example, for a house around 100 to 116 square meters, we also need to ensure that even when divided, we have 30 square meters, which is within the limits.
Yes. If you've seen my old videos, you know I'm more of a right-wing guy, so loans didn't really scare me. No, actually, for those who don't know, I'm actually closer to anarchism. There you go. My original idea was not to take out a loan. That's how I began. The project version 1 is Julien buys a non-buildable plot of land, puts a mobile home on it, and lives in a 30 to 40 square meter mobile home. That's version 1, you see? And then your girlfriend comes along and says, we're not going to live in 40 square meters, even if it's big. So actually, okay, fine. Then we'll build a house with 2 shipping containers. That way it's 60 square meters and it's not too expensive. And so there's no need to take out a loan because we ask the family for money and everything and we pay them back. And all of that doesn't really matter. And then your mom comes along and says, but what if you sell it one day? 2 containers is still small. You still need more space. Okay, I'll do the math. Adding 3 containers costs an extra 20,000 euros. For that price, it makes sense to add another, so 3 containers. Then your architect says if you have 4, it forms an L shape with the kitchen and isn't much more expensive. When you sell, it's better, and real estate agents tell you, yes, larger will sell better. If it's small, it might not sell, especially with an unusual house. So you decide to make it bigger. Meanwhile, you decided not to ask your family for money and said, Walou, we'll get a loan. Knowing that I got my loan at a rate of 1.5% and there's about 2% inflation per year. So basically, I don't even notice the interest on my loan, it gets absorbed by inflation. And that means I have to pay back about 550 euros per month for 25 years for a 116 square meter house in the countryside. So it didn't seem super expensive to me. I wondered if, after a collapse of civilization and banks, I wouldn't have loans to repay. That's my naive side, a little bit, because they'll come for the money, you don't have to worry about that. But there you go. And then I thought, if all this really gets on my nerves, It's big, it's beautiful, I can sell it and do a smaller project without going through the banks later when I've settled my life a bit and I know what I want to do. But actually, between your original idea of wanting to live simply in nature, naked, and your friends and family who don't necessarily have the same aspirations, it kind of guides you. And in the end, I'm still happy. The homobium of 40 square meters. It would have been less comfortable than the house, but I still imagine that if I were to build another wood, earth, and straw house sometime in the future, I'd make it smaller. Focus on understanding and redefining my needs and build based on them, not on anything else, like reselling. I'm an impressionable influencer. It's complicated. I'm doing a report on container houses. I'm building a container house. Every time I do a report, it influences me. I'm weak. All right, the last question. Maybe that was the last question. Don't let me finish with I'm weak. I still have some toxic masculinity that keeps me from appearing weak.
Hi, I have one final question related to the previous ones.
It was about the neighbors' reactions. Did they react? What did they think? That's all.
Actually, I didn't mention container house in my building permit. I said metal frame house. I like to pay a lot, huh? Metal frame house. There's wood on top later, so you don't care. 4 containers arrive at your rural property where there are 300 residents. The next day, all the countryside's old folks visited the mayor. They said, they're putting the containers in the field, that's not possible. What, really? 3 days later, the mayor and everyone showed up like, so what are you doing at home then? Oh, but it's in a container. I said, well, yes. Oh, no, but actually before it was Roger who was the mayor, and Roger said yes, but the mayor changed in the meantime. Because Roger, actually, he left, so now I'm the new mayor. I don't know anything about it, so I say no, but everything's in order if you want to check. He says no, so I guess that's it. And so all the old folks who were scared, well, actually now, every week, they come by, and so they look, they go, oh, but this is really nice, actually. They're curious, you know? So it started with, oh my God, what's happening? And now it's the main attraction of the village. You know, it's really the main attraction of the village. I mean, really, when I'm on the construction site, I'm screwing something in. And I turn around, and there's an old guy next to me just watching me. Damn. What does he want? So yeah, all this crap is going just fine. Yeah. No, it's good now and gets people talking. It allows me to talk to them about eco-construction. They've already offered to sell me wood to heat myself. In the countryside, in the end, you find those social connections again very quickly. In the end, fear outweighed harm. And I'll conclude on that note about this container house, which is a step toward an eco-friendly home. And I hope you learned a lot from this. Feel free to check all that out on the YouTube channel and subscribe to the professional training courses and get inspired by them. And to work on your big projects too. There you go, lots of good things. Thank you, goodbye.